ridiculous wars the same as men can.
He came out publicly in support of same-sex marriage, which has obviously never been done before.
And then the Supreme Court set aside 2 days, I believe it is.
I thought it was 3.
Is it 3? You corrected me. I knew it was more than 1 day, and that's very rare for the United States Supreme Court.
But it's 2 cases, though.
Yes, but when you're dealing with one issue, let me back up. The Supreme Court of the United States has accepted certiorari on 2 cases. One that challenges California's referendum constitutional provision that restricts marriage to between a male and a female. The other case challenges a statute, I don't know which state it is, that refuses to recognize...
Massachusetts. The Massachusetts couple
sought recognition of their marriage in another state, and that state has a statute that refuses to recognize, and that's kind of in violation, arguably, of the full faith and credit clause of the Constitution of the United States.
They were legally married in their home state.
Right.
But then the state to which they moved refused to recognize their marriage. And that has a lot of ramifications in terms of financial ramifications.
Part of that, too, is that the federal government doesn't have to recognize a marriage in a state where it's legal for tax purposes.
And for benefits as well as death benefits, federal death benefits.
Well, there's 1,138 benefits to being married federally. So
Just federally.
Yeah.
We should explain the writ of certiorari is a petition process to the United States Supreme Court in which you ask them to hear your case. It is completely up to the U.S. Supreme Court, and they hear very, very few cases.
Very few.
About 150 out of 10,000. So
no, actually, it's more like 90 to 95 out of 10,000.
Okay, so it's equivalent to about 1%. So in fact, your case is heard by the U.S. Supreme Court is very significant because they don't just take a case because it was decided wrong. They take a case because 2 reasons, basically. A very important legal issue out there that needs to be cited, and sometimes the second is where you have conflicts in jurisdictions, where one jurisdictions decide one way and the others decide the same way, the same issue another way.
Or a third reason could be states are suing each other, as is sometimes the case.
I believe they have original jurisdiction on it.
They do. Indiana sued Kentucky over land that somehow now is on this side of the Ohio River, but is recognized as being Kentucky's.
The Ohio River moves over time. All rivers move over time, and now
they always move. You can never step in the same river.
If you go
twice.
down to Evansville, there's actually part of the land north of the river that's Kentucky.
Yeah, it's Kentucky's attempt to encroach on Indiana and invade us.
Yes, they're trying to invade us. Anyway, we're getting off track.
That's true.
But I thought that one of the cases was over federal benefits, federal death benefits.
Yeah, I think that's I think actually that's where they're
rather than the moving thing.
And then that could be. I knew that the question was the recognition of one state by one state of another state's legal marriage. Here in Indiana, before this flurry of statutory activity occurred, and right now, by the way, Indiana's General Assembly has put on hold, apparently, the constitutional amendment that was being proposed to limit marriage.
And let's explain that. Most states, the way they do it, a constitutional amendment to their state constitution, is similar to the federal. 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate approve. Then it goes to the voters for ratification. Indiana is unusual in that we can pass a constitutional amendment out of the legislature through a simple majority of both the House and the Senate, but the rule is it's got to pass twice through 2 separately elected general assemblies, and then it goes to the voters for ratification. It's passed once through the legislature a couple years ago, and now the question is it going to pass the second time? It can either pass this year or next year.
And the Speaker of the House and other leaders in the General Assembly have agreed that they should probably wait until after the Supreme Court rules, because if the Supreme Court rules that California's constitutional action is unconstitutional, then that kind of makes the whole point moot.
Well, it also, there's not a system for taking the issue off the ballot. So they could end up with an issue on the ballot where voters are voting for it, and it's moot. The issue is moot. So.
And that's moot, M-O-O-T,
as opposed to mute.
M-U-T-E.
Right.
So we're looking at essentially providing civil rights for people. And I want to add one last thing. Our panel today, we're going to discuss these issues. We tried to get somebody that was across the board opposed to the extension of rights to people. And I made a couple of phone calls to organizations and didn't receive calls back. And so if there is any kind of bias that is perceived on this panel, and I think there are going to be divergent views, but if there's no reason for a bias on this panel, we were trying to get people across the board on their views, but it's just that some people wouldn't come on and defend those views.
And I argued on Facebook, I didn't see if you responded, that to be fair to the other side, we are in an environment friendly to LGBT. We have a strong panel here. It would be like me being invited to the National Organization of Women and asked to argue abortion and having my pro-life views, and it would be a very uncomfortable environment.
Okay, first of all, you wouldn't argue abortion. You'd be arguing a woman's right to choose what she wishes to do with her body. So we would be going into a different.
And we are really getting off course.
I understand that, but
I disagree with
I want to get. We're here at Aesop's Tables, and it's at 600 East Mass Ave, and it is friendly to LGBT people, and they have an excellent menu. And I'm looking through a list of beers here too. They have. I have
of course
such,
you are, Mark.
I have such pedestrian tastes in beer. A really excellent list of beers and wines. So let's talk about people's rights in terms of basic rights and civil rights. And marriage is an obvious one, and I want to get to that in a couple of minutes, but another one that people possibly don't think about because they take it for granted. What about housing? If a landlord, for example, does not want to rent to a couple because they're African American, that's a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and various other statutes.
And the Fair Housing.
Yes, so it's like there'd be no question of that.
Well, in Marion County, that's illegal. We have a human rights ordinance that was passed a few years ago that does make discrimination against LGBT people in the area of housing illegal also.
But a lot of communities don't have that.
Right.
No.
And so that's something where, and I guess someone would say in opposition to that, well, if they just don't say anything about it, they'd be okay.
Well, no, in opposition of it is that that's technically a small business. I mean, we're restricting their right to, choose who they rent their property out to. I don't think that's right. If somebody doesn't want to rent to me, I'm not going to force them to want to rent to me, and that's.
I think it's an interesting perspective, though. If we're going to go in some sort of order, we're going to take the marriage issue first. Are we getting ahead of stuff?
I thought it'd be interesting to get the non-obvious, top issue and screw up your notes and your outline you had there.
I know. I made an outline. You screwed it up.
I'm sorry, Paul. No, I'm not. Okay, so a private landlord can choose to whom he or she or it, because it could be a corporate entity, wishes to rent. Do you think that's the case for race?
Yeah, no. If somebody wants to discriminate against customers, then fine, by all means. I mean, I wouldn't want to live somewhere where they're being forced to allow me to live there. That's not comfortable. That's creating tension where there shouldn't be tension, and because they're being forced to rent to me by threat of force or being sued or anything else. So I wouldn't want to have to say rent to somebody I don't necessarily like. I don't want to, when we're talking about different kinds of people, I wouldn't, if I had a property, I wouldn't want to rent it out to a racist or a redneck or somebody that's, homophobic. I wouldn't want to have to rent to them, but isn't that technically discrimination too? Because they could say that's based on their religious views or their whatever, so.
Well, you should clarify with the current status of the law, because the Civil Rights Act is 64, is that places of public accommodation. This is a place of public accommodation, a restaurant, you can go into a hotel. You can't discriminate against certain groups of people.
Protected classes.
Protected classes, correct. Individuals who have a different sexual orientation is not one of those classes right now. The question is, do you make it one of those classes? And that is just something that the courts, it's not written in the Constitution, it's something the courts have interpreted.
In my opinion, and this is as a small business owner myself, that deals with the public, I believe there are certain benefits to developing and putting effort into opening up a business that takes advantage of the opportunities that are afforded Americans, that is based on a principle of justice and equality and fairness. And I think we have an opportunity, we have an obligation to live up to those standards by taking advantage of, because we take advantage of them. And so.
But what about Maya's point about races, that you have to cut racist hair?
Well, there's
a Nazi symbol in their hair.
There's a difference between being able to discriminate against something that is a matter of choice or personal viewpoints or perspectives, and being able to discriminate against something that is innate and inborn. Mm-hmm. And that's generally the protections that we afford people. Now, religion is the one exemption or exception to that rule that does get afforded protection, even though it is a matter of choice. So we have race and national origin, those kinds of things that are protected, and gender identity and sexual orientation are also equally inborn and should also be a member of those protected classes.
And